Issues and debates, the nature and nurture debates. So the whole debate here is how are nature and nurture different? Should we be looking solely biological or solely environmental, or taking an interactionist approach? Now, we are aware what nature is. Nature is biology. This is how innately you are different to somebody, genetics, DNA. But there are a few other key terms that we will need for this section for AO1. The first is heredity. This is saying how much are these traits passed from parents to their offspring. So looking at a genetic inheritance, how much have we taken biologically from our parents? Interactionist is where we are looking at how they work together rather than in opposition. So if we think back to schizophrenia, we might take a diathesis stress approach, genetics and environment. And then nice and easy, environment is nurture. So everything that we are exposed to, friendship groups, experiences, this will affect how we behave. Some new key words that we might need then, or we're going to talk about, is epigenetics to start. So if epigenetics talk about how our genetic activity changes, but it doesn't change our genetic code. So we call these like epigenetic marks. Things that we do in our environment, like smoking, is going to have an effect or mark on our DNA. This means that we will then pass on these potential changes in our DNA if we have children. It's going to affect the genetic codes of our children. So smoking, drinking, vaping, these are epigenetic marks that could affect how certain genes are coded. Nature. We know what nature is, everything that is innate to us. A new key idea here is the heritability coefficient. So we're thinking, correlation coefficient. It's similar here. This is a numerical figure ranging from 0 to 1, indicating the extent to which these characteristics have a genetic basis. A value of 1 means that it's 100% genetic. Generally, we're about 0.5 heritability coefficient, which means that half of our behaviour is due to our genetics and our nature, the other half our environment. Now, two key people, if we think back to the origins of psychology right at the start, we did our timeline. We have Descartes and Locke. These are two philosophers. Now, they were very much in they had different beliefs in terms of how our behaviour manifests. For Descartes, it was all about, he was a nativist, so everything we did was inherited by our parents. And, well, that should say 1556. And John Locke is an empiricist. If you think back to behaviourist, empirical measures, we are a blank slate, tabula rasa. Everything we do is because of our environment. It dictates who we are and our behaviour. So Descartes is nature, Locke is nurture. If we think back then to remember with issues and debates, you can apply it throughout the 2 years of the course. We go back to our approaches. Behaviourist is obviously solely nurture, biological is solely nature. And then we have these interactionist approaches in the middle. So cognitive is there, social learning theory is there. Humanistic is more towards nurture because it's this DIY, do-it-yourself, self-help, client-centered therapy, hierarchy of needs. Psychodynamic is more towards nature, believe it or not. Because of that psychic determinism, everything we do is because of our unconscious drives. We don't decide to do it, our unconscious does it for us. Other studies then that we have into nature and nurture, there's a few more that we'll look at. Attachments, Bowlby, solely nature. He argues that children have this innate want to attach. Parents will naturally respond to it because it's within them, maternal and paternal instinct to do that. Plomin is a key researcher within nature nurture who puts forward this idea of a passive influence. Parents' genes influence aspects of behaviour, and that will create an environment for their children. So, for example, if we have parents with a mental illness, this might naturally create an unsettled home environment, and a child almost develops that mental illness because of the environment that they're in. And then epigenetics, like we said, the choices we make now are going to influence as far ahead in our genetic code as our grandchildren. And we've got a study here with male lab mice, giving them electric shocks every time they were exposed to a chemical. And, behaviourists would predict that they would show fear, therefore they would try to not do it. And then when they bred those rats, the children also showed fear of the smell, even though they'd never been exposed, as did their grandchildren, the mice. So it does have an evolutionary biological impact on behaviour, these epigenetics. They're fascinating. If we also think back then to gender with David Reimer, we can apply him here for nature nurture. Remember, he, the twin who sadly lost his penis during a routine procedure, raised as Brenda, raised as a girl, but always knew that he was a boy. So his nature and nurture, they didn't combine. Ultimately, he then went back, decided to be a boy, because he always knew he was. Now, if we go to AO3 then, what can we use to support this idea of nature nurture? Well, we will go to adoption studies, because they are really important in trying to separate these two debates. If we think back to, for example, schizophrenia, with Tanari's study, there's adopted children with mothers who had schizophrenia. They had a significantly higher percentage of developing it themselves. We also have this here with Sue Ree, a meta-analysis. Genetic influences did account for 41% of the variance in aggression. So we see it with schizophrenia and we're seeing it with aggression. But as we know, research suggests it's misguided. Nature nurture should be combined. It shouldn't be that we view them as single entities. Like Plomin said, these biological differences may actually create an environment that may, think of expressed emotion, for example, may develop something like schizophrenia. Or aggressive children are comfortable with other aggressive children, in terms of Sue Ree's study. They kind of just look for what fits the narrative. So it doesn't make sense to look at evidence of either. It should be a combination. There is support for epigenetics here. We've got a really large study in the 40s. The Nazis blocked distribution of food to the Dutch people. 22,000 people died of starvation. Women who were pregnant during that time had really low weight babies and were twice as likely to develop schizophrenia. Showing us then, life experiences of previous generation leave markers. They leave markers that is going to affect the health of offspring. Now, there's loads of research. Biologists, I'm sure you all know more about epigenetics, but lots of evidence to show that it does have a lasting effect. And then we do have some real life application. We're going back to OCD here with Nestat. The heritability rates, the coefficient, 0.76, showing us that there is quite a large biological heritability rate of OCD. This can then help with genetic counselling. So if you know that you have a genetic vulnerability, it might go on to develop the disorder. It might put you might feel more comfortable with asking for help and treatments. And we might be able to then prevent this. We might be able to do things environmentally, taking that interactionist approach to help manage if that person then does develop OCD. So a Journal 2 marker that you could be asked, just what is meant by the nature nurture. You would give a key definition of each for 2 marks, 4 minutes. See if you could add, something specific into your answer there, maybe research. There's an answer here that might back that up. And then a few here to have a go at, so you can pause this, just practice. Again, we've got a little bit of research methods, always interleaved. And then a plan, as always, for what a 16 marker could be if it was nature nurture.